Social emotional learning, or SEL, is the process of learning social and emotional skills, and it's every bit as important as reading or math. This process is most effective when starting early and continues through high school. SEL skills are critical when it comes to success in school, work, and in life. SEL helps students manage their emotions, have empathy, solve problems, and make responsible decisions, just to name a few. Students learn the skills to succeed in school and the rest of their lives. Welcome to episode 125 of the Teacher Rockstar podcast, a place where tips and strategies critical to the first-year teacher are discussed. We share the latest educational research and best practices so that the new teacher can be better equipped for a successful classroom experience. I'm your host, Steve Hiles, and today we'll be talking about social emotional learning with our expert guest, Patrick Cook-Deegan. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Would you like to supercharge your classroom management skills? Well, if you're a first-year teacher or have less than 5 years of classroom experience, the Teacher Rockstar Academy course is for you. Gain the confidence, the skills you'll need to make all the difference in the world for our boys and girls. Enroll now at tra.teacherclassroomresources.com. I'll be with you every step of the way. Become the best version of yourself. So invest in yourself today. Enroll now at tra.teacherclassroomresources.com. Now, before we dive into today's topic, I'd like to share a little bit about our guest, Patrick Cook-Deegan. Now, Patrick is one of today's outstanding educational thought leaders. His expertise and passion lie in how to transform schools from the inside out using SEL. Patrick is the founder and CEO of the K-12 SEL curriculum provider, Wayfinder. Wayfinder was born out of Patrick's experience teaching high school students at a public school in Oakland, California. During his time there, Patrick tried to find a curriculum that would help his students develop a sense of purpose and prepare them to lead meaningful lives. Unable to find a curriculum that landed with his students, he began developing his own. Patrick's work has been featured in the Washington Post, Forbes, Boston Globe, NPR, and TechCrunch. His writing has appeared in Fast Company, Stanford Social Innovation Review, Edutopia, UC Berkeley's Greater Good, and in the book, Purpose Rising. He has written extensively on purpose development in adolescence. Patrick is a Fulbright scholar, All-American high school lacrosse player, Brown University graduate, and former lecturer at Stanford University and UC Berkeley. Patrick currently lives in beautiful Central Oregon with his wife and one-year-old son, Jaden, where he is an avid backcountry skier. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
All right. It's such a pleasure to have you share your expertise with us today. Could you tell our listeners about your journey in the education world?
Yeah, so I graduated from a large public high school in Annapolis, Maryland, and always thought I wanted to go into high school education since my time being in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Brown and I studied the history of American education and public policy. And then, thought I was going to go directly into teaching and education, and ended up during my sophomore year of college taking a gap year and biked about 5,000 kilometers across Southeast Asia to raise money for school.
Wow. Okay.
And so that ended up being my first educational project, just helping to raise money and build a school, and then providing 2 K-12 girls scholarships. And ended up traveling for about 2 more years, and then worked on human rights in Burma for 5 years. So I did a lot of informal education, teaching in refugee camps. And then when I would come back to the United States, speaking about global service and what was going on in Burma. And during that time, I would, speak at high schools and middle schools, and started a small program to take lower income American students abroad to volunteer just to get that exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I had a more, I guess, untraditional path for the beginning part of my 20s. And then the latter half of my 20s, I started teaching mindfulness and SEL to teenagers, and took over an organization that taught mindfulness to teenagers in the summer, and then led wilderness trips in the summer. And then during the school year, I was teaching in California, advisory, social emotional learning, mindfulness, to high school students during the year, and then leading experiential education trips during the summer.
Wow, that is an amazing path. It certainly is. I have to ask you, why, Patrick, is SEL important when it comes to learning in the classroom? And that's what I really want to key on because, like I said, I think it would be extremely helpful for the new teacher or the one just fresh out of college, to have this information.
Yeah, well, the fundamental thing you need for anyone to learn is one, a connection to the material and the person teaching it. And then
Hmm.
two, your brain needs to be in a learning stance, right?
Yeah, right.
Same thing in sports. If you go in and you're like, hey, let's try this new move in basketball, but you're not warmed up or you're thinking about something else or your shoulder hurts, like you wouldn't do it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So really how I think about it is that, if you want to learn math, science, the history of, where did the printing press come from? Whatever it is, if you're not focused, you can't learn anything. And so a lot of core SEL and foundational skills come down to, can I regulate myself and can I regulate my attention and my
Right. Okay.
and that's at the individual learner stance. And then there's a lot of research that shows that, students learn when they feel connected to one, the person, and two, why they're learning it.
Right, right. Okay. That's really something here. Then how does SEL improve the emotional health of students? Um, you know, I have to tell you, I know when I first started teaching, SEL wasn't, I don't know if it just didn't seem to be, if it wasn't math or science, you know what I mean? If it wasn't something that you can grade or put in a grade book, whatever, it just wasn't talked about. So, but the bottom line is, how does SEL improve the emotional health of students?
Yeah, so SEL is traditionally broken down into a few different categories about behavior management, self-awareness, ability to work with others. But at the core is like if SEL goes well, and it has to be taught well, is that students have a better understanding of who they are,
Hmm.
what they care about, how to regulate themselves, how to work well with other people, and then how to function in society, right? Those are some of the core things that SEL gets at when it goes well.
Right, right. Would you recommend when a teacher is teaching SEL concepts, okay, that it be a specific time of the day, like, I don't know, during homeroom, or incorporated in with actual lessons like math, science, social studies, that kind of thing? What do you
Yeah,
think?
I mean,
Yeah,
I think it really depends, particularly by division. So elementary, middle, and high school, it's so different,
yeah,
right? It's much easier for a second grade teacher to integrate it than it is for an 11th grade calculus teacher. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
context is key here. I do think that, one of the failings of SEL is it's often kind of like put in a corner and they're like, okay, let's do SEL for 5 minutes in the corner and then let's come back to the real world.
Yeah.
Right. And then shockingly, it doesn't work that well. So I think there's a lot of times for you, let's say you're even having a debate in civics class about something and people
Uh-huh.
get really heated and they're getting after it. You just be like, okay, let's all take a deep breath, you know,
Hmm.
stay cool, and then let's continue the debate. So you don't have to do some like lesson, but you can just take a moment and pause and see where we're going.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense there. Now, tell me this, how, can you speak to how SEL promotes teamwork and leadership?
Yeah, well, I mean, I run a company, right? And I played team sports for a long time.
Uh-huh.
I think a lot of being a leader is being able to read how people are doing and where they're at emotionally, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you're leading a sports team and everyone's down on themselves, right? Being a coach and getting more down on them isn't the best thing to do. But let's say you're leading a team and they're like feeling a little cocky, then maybe the best thing to do is to lean into them and chew them out a little bit. But if
Yeah.
you do the same thing at the wrong time, it can be the wrong thing to do. And the key thing you have to be able to do that is to read people.
Right. Okay. All right. Then how does SEL foster a more inclusive learning environment?
Yeah, well, the main thing about that is just paying attention to like what else is in the room, what other people in the room, what other type of people in the room, and
Uh-huh.
there's certain things that you might notice, or there's certain things you might not notice. And again, sorry, that comes down a
Mhm.
little bit to your attention and your awareness, right? So you
Yeah.
might in the class, we probably all have these students where it's like the same student just talks all the time, right?
Yeah, we've had them.
Talking, talking, and talking. And then there's certain students that are never speaking up either because they feel nervous or that one person just keeps talking.
Mm-hmm.
So, an inclusive classroom, one of the things is that people get to say things. It's not just the same three people, right? So, in terms of social emotional learning and self awareness, you could go to that person, it's generally a young guy, and be like, "Hey, you notice that you kind of talk all the time. Like, do you even notice that, first of all? And sometimes,
Yeah.
why do you do that? And what do you think that does to the classroom?"
Yeah.
Right. But,
Absolutely.
but we've all had that student. And so the question is, how do you address that?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, that's a good point there. This leads me to something else I wanted to talk to you about here, and that's, you know, how do students achieve greater academic success with SEL? I mean, I think the new teacher just coming, their first year on the job, um, how would that help them? What could they do here? Or
Yeah. Well, there's a ton of research, which I won't get into because people can look it up about how SEL improves academic outcomes.
uh-huh,
But I would just think of it from the basic perspective. There's this one researcher and kind of leading neuroscientist named Dr. Dan Siegel based out of UCLA.
uh-huh,
Writes a lot about the neuroscience of the teenage brain. And he has this thing where he calls it flipping your lid, which is basically when your brain is in fight or flight or freak out mode, it
mm-hmm,
can really focus on almost anything we want students to focus on in school, right? It's in survival mode. Someone's really angry, someone's hungry, someone's really upset, someone's focused on something else. If that's where their attention is, your attention at any given moment can't be on two things at once, right? So if that's where
right,
your attention is, then you're not going to pay attention to what's being taught. So a key part of SEL is one, helping students recognize what place they're in mentally, and then two, if your lid is flipped because someone said something mean to you at lunch, because someone on social media is bullying you,
mm-hmm,
because you have a test in 3 periods and you can't get it out of your mind, right? All of these places your mind could be is, can you recognize that? And then do you have the resources and tools to recenter yourself so that you can come back and actually pay attention? Because everyone here knows, especially if you're teaching this year, if a student's not paying attention to you, they're not learning anything.
right, right,
And generally, a good approach to getting them to pay attention to you isn't just say, "Hey, pay attention." Like, how many times has that worked? Right.
mm-hmm,
And
right,
often it's an underlying behavior that a student or person has that is repeated, right? And until you get into the nuances of that, they're probably not going to change their behavior. So I
right.
think when SEL or mindfulness is done effectively, it's used as a way to change behavior so that but that a student can do it themselves and they don't need an outside person telling them to intervene in that way.
Right. And Patrick, this kind of ties in with Eric Jensen's brain-based learning theories, about how emotion plays a very big part in the brain learning. I think that's yeah, I think that's uh, fantastic there. Um, which leads me to the next thing I want to talk to you about is how does the SEL help educators interact with students on a more intimately?
Yeah, so at the core of any, I think, good teaching classroom or relationship is a connection, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
if you don't have a connection with your students, it's gonna be really hard for them to want to learn from you, right? So I always thought when I was a teacher, and I taught mostly freshmen and sophomore boys in high school, but I taught a range of folks.
Uh-huh.
What you want to establish at the beginning of the year is a sense of connection and a shared, and give them, a sense of who you are outside of just teaching content. Not too much, but some.
Right.
And then you want to know who they are to some extent as well. And so a lot of what like Wayfinder's curriculum focuses on, for example, is like helping that adult student relationship and building that sense of connection.
Okay.
And I think at the younger grades, that happens more naturally. But as we get older into the grades, seventh, eighth, ninth, 12th grade, there's less time built in for connection, and it's so content focused. And often that content leaves out some of this necessary stuff to build that connection.
Right. Right. Well, what would be some examples of SEL questions that teachers could ask their students? Like, for example, if you had a question about regarding an emotions or self-awareness, uh, what might be a question, what would be an example of a SEL question?
Yeah, I think of it less as questions in the
Mm-hmm.
sense, I think of it more as activities or lessons.
Uh-huh.
Because if it's just a question, it comes off as kind of like random or weird, right? And that's where SEL kind of loses, and I would say gets made fun of, for lack of a better term, because you
Uh,
can't just sit there with a ninth grade board and be like, "How are you doing?" And he's like, "Why are you asking me that?"
yeah, yeah,
Morning.
yeah.
So to me, I think it's much more like Wayfinder's whole curriculum designed K through 12
Uh-huh.
is what are activities and lessons that foster a sense of belonging and connection. And I actually don't think you do those in one question. I think you do them in a series of activities and lessons over time, and that individual questions are part of it. But if you just leave it to the one off question, which is often done in SEL, I think it comes off as a little cheesy or random,
Uh-huh.
or like it could be seen as like you're trying too hard, right?
Yeah, yeah, I see what you mean. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I also think it's different for every classroom and every student,
Yeah,
right?
for
Like,
sure.
so
Hmm.
one size fits all here.
Yeah. Well, can you speak to this virtual reality thing and its implications in the classroom? Uh, where they put them whatchamacallits on
Yeah.
and yeah, see things in 3D.
Yeah, I can't speak a lot to that because I got out of the classroom a few years ago.
Uh-huh.
So I wasn't around when that was happening. So I try not to speak to things I don't know about,
Yeah,
but I
yeah, I hear you.
say
Okay,
that's
no problem. No problem. Let me ask you this then, Patrick. In what ways can a teacher consistently, and this is what I want to have my new teachers really, focus on, is consistently model SEL in and out of the classroom?
yeah. So I think one thing that's very simple is like students and human beings can tell when someone cares how they're doing, right? So if
Hmm.
you look at research on employers and workplaces, one of the number one things that employees look for is, does my manager care about me and my future? Right? So
Yeah,
that's the number one thing. And in the classroom, it's the same thing. Is, does my teacher care about who I am? Do they know anything about me? And that doesn't mean, sometimes there's like this connotation with that you have to know everything about them and ask them how they're doing all the time. And for some students, that might totally backfire. So I think it's different for each student.
yes, I do too.
But there's ways that you can show you care about someone, even if they're quiet and subtle. And that goes a long way. And students notice that. So I would say
Hmm.
that's one thing, is um, just connecting and caring for your
Yeah,
students.
but
And
basically a genuine concern for the
yeah,
student. Yeah, yeah.
that's why most people get into education.
Right, right. And
Like
how
that.
about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty rare that someone is sitting in their room one day and it's like, you know what, I don't really care about kids and I don't really want to deal with them, so I'm going to go become a teacher.
Yeah.
Right. I just don't think that happens. Now, by this time of year, it's March, it's spring break. There are definitely thoughts of like, man, why did I do this?
Yeah. And June can't come fast enough.
And I wish this one kid would go away. So that's totally real. But I think it's easy to, with all the demands on teachers and post-COVID reality, is
Oh,
it's
yes, yes.
to forget that part. But I think that's one of the simplest ways. The other, I think another really simple thing, but it's powerful, and Dr. Bill Damon at Stanford studied this, who some of our work is modeled off of, is
Hmm.
that humans like knowing why humans do something, right? So if someone opens a restaurant and you talk to the chef and they love cooking, they just love food,
Hmm.
connects you more to the food. And there was a study where they basically teachers went up and they said, here's why I became a teacher. Here's what motivates me. Here's what made me want to do that. It actually got students way more invested in their classroom, regardless of the subject or SES or anything else. I said
Hmm.
students like to know why someone's doing it. And so I think another way they can model that in like a healthy way is just like, hey, here's why I'm here. Here's what I'm hoping to get out of the year. And here's what motivates me to do this.
Right. Now, how about out of the classroom? What would you suggest to teachers how they model SEL out of the room?
I think the main thing is just taking care of yourself outside of the classroom, which is much easier said than done.
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, if you think of fight or flight, it applies to adults and kids as well. So if your neurocircuitry is out of whack, if you're not sleeping enough, if you're eating bad, if you don't work out, if you know you're just working too much, then you know, like people can feel that, right?
Hmm.
They feel when you're tweaked out. And I know that's super challenging because teachers, especially if you're coaching and then you have your own family and you have a commute, like that's much easier said than done. But I do think trying to stay balanced yourself, and even if you can't do all of the things you need to do, making what I've seen some teachers do is do like they have like 5 or 8 things they want to do and then they can't, so they do none of them. So
Right.
it's keeping like 2 or 3, you
Hmm.
know, and
Yeah.
I think it's really easy to throw them all out, especially this time of year.
Right. Absolutely. I know that here previously, COVID really hampered SEL. I mean, wouldn't you agree to that? I mean, obviously all the schools are back in session now, but that was a hard thing during that time, and I just wanted you to address if we go into a situation like that again, or maybe they're teaching through distance learning, maybe something else, transpired that they have to do that. How does one, implement SEL in a situation like that? Where you're teaching through distance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I don't have a silver bullet, so I'm not
Yeah,
going to give you a silver bullet answer. It's that
yeah.
humans are designed to interact through screens.
Uh-huh.
So SEL was hard because interacting through a screen is hard. And a lot of SEL is picking up on the subtle cues that are in a room that you can read people
Mm-hmm.
really hard um, in person, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this sounds like it might seem like a random example, but if you look at what makes a really good in-person poker player versus an online poker player, they actually have really different makeups because the people that are really good at it in person are reading the other people in the room in a way that you can't do that online.
Yeah, yeah, that's the problem. Hmm.
Right. So there's just a different skill set. So, you know, if I was sitting here telling you I have a magic solution to that, I'd probably be a rich man.
Yeah,
So I,
I hear that. Well, let me ask you this then, Patrick. How does the teacher concretely develop SEL, like, for example, problem solving and effective collaborations through content?
Well, give me some more specifics because, am I a second grader teacher in science? Am I 12th grade?
Okay, well, let's just take it for elementary. Let's take that, say a fourth grader, you know, and you're teaching them mathematics. Let's say, how to find digital roots or how to regroup or something like that. So, how does the teacher develop an SEL to help, with problem solving?
Yeah, well, one, it's very context specific, and
Uh
two, I I have mixed feeling. Like, I think there can be like an overreach of this too.
huh.
So I think you're like in the middle of like long division class, and you're like, let's all take a deep breath, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there's like this kind of fakeness to it that happens. So I'm like definitely not a fan of that. But what I would say, like in that context, is like generally some people get math easier than others, right? And
Hmm.
I wasn't particularly good at math compared to some of my peers. And so I got frustrated easily. And
Uh-huh.
then in math in high school, I had to get a tutor. And the tutor like really, really helped me. And so to me, it's not like I'm in the middle of long division and I'm going to do some random thing to pretend to do SEL. It might be more like, hey, when you don't get the answer the first time, how do you react? And is that helpful? And what could you do differently?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or
Yeah. I
another
think
strategy could be, hey, if you don't know this, like I didn't, like who could you reach out to for help?
okay. All right. Well, Patrick, what's the biggest takeaway that you would want new teachers to know when it comes to SEL?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that the fundamental thing, especially, the first year of teaching, it's kind of scary and
Yeah.
overwhelming. Hopefully, your folks by this time of the year, if they're listening, made it this far. But to me, it's about connection with the students and finding some small way to connect with
Hmm.
like the students that you're responsible for.
All right.
And it
Okay.
doesn't take a lot. Like the amount that you have to do to connect with them doesn't take a ton. But if you find one little thing for each student, I think it can go a really long way.
Yes, absolutely. I think so too. Let me ask you, where can folks go to connect with you to learn more about? I mean, you have a website you'd like to share?
Yeah, our Wayfinder's website is withwayfinder.com, and
Uh-huh.
we have like a comprehensive SEL and future ready skills curriculum. And right now we have about 500 schools and 500,000 kids across the country. And this year we're hoping to double that to about 1 million schools or 1 million kids and a
Uh-huh.
thousand schools across the country.
Oh, that's fantastic. That
So
is great.
go on there. It's with wayfinder.com, and we have sample curriculum resources that you can look for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of the things that I think differentiates us is trying to meet students where they're at with SEL and not making it cheesy and overdone. And also, really, especially, I started being a high school teacher,
Uh-huh.
is making it feel relevant and real to students and connecting it to their future pathways in life. So having it not just be SEL in a corner, but more like, hey, there's these foundational skills to being a human when you're an adult or being an employee of anywhere that you're going to need to be successful in the 21st century. And
Right.
that's what students. And
Oh,
some of them you would identify as quote SEL, and some of them you'd identify as quote CTE. But
uh-huh.
it turns out when you have a job, they're the same simultaneously all the time. It's not like in your job, you're like, oh, it's CTE time and now it's SEL time.
Yeah.
The only place that ever does that is school. Once you
Uh-huh.
get to school, it's all there all the time.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Patrick, I want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us today.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
All right, and I look forward to having you back on the show again. I want you to have a great day, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and appreciate everyone listening out there. And good luck in the final push of the school year.
All right. Thanks again. Well, my friend, this brings us to the end of this episode. Hope you found some golden nuggets from the information presented that you can implement in your classroom tomorrow. Feel free to reach out should you have any questions or comments about this episode. I want to thank you for listening to the Teacher Rockstar podcast. I'm your host, Steve Hiles. When you get a moment, visit my blog and subscribe to my newsletter for the latest educational research, best practices, and unadvertised free bonuses. Go to blog.teacherclassroomresources.com. And don't forget to subscribe to us at the Teacher Rockstar Podcast. And if you'd like to support us, please feel free to share our podcast with others, post about it on social media, and if you feel comfortable, leave a rating and review. That's always greatly appreciated. Thanks again. We'll see you same time, same place next week. And remember, my friend, you got this.